Welcome, everyone. My name is Stephen Halasnik, and I'm co-founder and managing partner of Financing Solutions. Financing Solutions is the leading provider of lines of credit to small nonprofits. Our line of credit program is easy, inexpensive, and costs nothing until used, making it a great cash backup plan for your nonprofit. If you'd like to learn more about the program, please visit us at nonprofitmbapodcast.com. And if you decide to apply today, we will even give you a $250 credit on file. Or feel free to give us a call at 862-207-4118. Just remember, the time to set up your line of credit is now, not when you actually have the emergency come up. And because the line of credit costs nothing to set up and nothing until used, it's just a great cash backup plan. I can't tell you how many executive directors that we work with, which are certainly in the hundreds, just so happy that they have this cash backup plan. Today, I am excited to be speaking with James Mueller from James Mueller and Associates. James has been immersed in the nonprofit sector leadership throughout his career, which is 4 decades of experience working with or serving on nonprofit boards. From higher education to healthcare to social service agencies, he has experienced every imaginable combination of good people trying to do things through board services. As an author, lecturer, philanthropic, and organizational strategist, and nonprofit government expert, Mueller shares a lifetime of experience with nonprofit boards and executives. His work helping nonprofits advance their missions has earned him recognition nationally. The pages of his most recent book, Onboarding Champions, are filled with intelligent and practical advice interwoven with a lifetime of stories about working with nonprofit boards. James, welcome to today's Nonprofit MBA podcast.
Thank you very much. I'm happy to be here.
So this is a good topic. We haven't really covered this topic. We're starting to, I think this is something like our 36th podcast, and we're starting to drill down into a little bit more details of various different important items that affect a nonprofit. And so I really like this topic. I know you wrote a good book on it as well. Today's topic is onboarding and recruiting principles for effective nonprofit boards. So, in general, this is about bringing on, the right type of person for your nonprofit board. So when you started writing about this book that you had come out with, what gave you the thought process that this was something that really needed to be understood?
Well, having worked with boards from the very start of my career, I watched how, as I said, so many well-intentioned people trying to do something good, but with very little education around how to do it well. And so over the last, as you noted, 4 decades, I've seen this kind of a consistent pattern of good people wanting to do good things, but without a lot of education or knowledge about how to do it, what their role is, and how to be most effective for the nonprofit.
Yeah. It's just like hiring, right? Over the 25 years that, I've been in business, it takes you a couple years to figure out that if you hire the right people and you train them, and you provide them the right resources, that your job gets a heck of a lot easier, doesn't it?
You just hit it right on the head. That's
Yeah.
the one thing we fail to do most often in board member recruitment. It's who's within arm's reach. So here you have a group of people who hold the highest office and have the greatest impact on the nonprofit, and they're the least trained and the least carefully selected, and usually. And so the book outlines how do you attract, identify, and then onboard effective board members.
Yeah. Do you think that, the executive directors, they're all running around like crazy, trying to do so many different things, right?
Yeah.
Do you think, and I know we're going to jump ahead, we're jumping ahead a little, at least I am,
Right.
and I don't know the answer to this question, I'm just asking it, because I would think logically, I would make sure that the person I hired, correction, the person I asked to join the board as the president would be the one I would, spend the most time making sure I got the right person, and then I'd ask them to bring on the rest of the members based on the criteria that we both put together. Is that make that way the executive director can step away from it a little bit? Does that make any sense or no?
I don't think you misspoke when you said hired. I think
Oh,
that's the approach. That's the approach we should take
yeah,
to recruiting board members. And I talk about all those 7 principles of how they need to be activated in order to get the right people on board, and then educate them sufficiently so that they can do a good job and the right job. What I most often see is a confluence of governance and management. That is the most frequent problem I encounter, where board members step into management because that's what they know how to do rather than governance, or CEOs kind of manage their boards and the board members just become a bobblehead approval board. So
yeah.
it's finding that balance of trusteeship, which is governance, and organizational operations, which is management.
So, tell us about some of the recommendations and some of the insights that you would give about bringing on good board members. And by the way, just a step, you can get a little closer to your microphone. That would be good.
Great,
Uh,
I can do
yeah,
that. Yeah, my mic is not working too well with this system. So,
yeah,
what I have here then is to say the first thing is your culture by default or intentional? We know that you can manage culture by managing your core values. There's been a lot of research on that. So the first thing is, what culture do you want to create in your organization, but also within your board? What is that intentional culture? And that's the foundation of recruitment, is what is our culture? Have we made it explicit? And then the second thing that I talk about is what volunteers who serve on boards are hesitant to do, and that is check out the person's character. That's a real critical issue that sometimes gets overlooked. Well, we know this is a good guy, he's a friend or she's a friend, and I'm sure she will do a great job. And then you find out later on that there's a problem. And I've seen this a couple of times with organizations where they haven't really checked the person, their background. When I served on the Girl Scouts board, they did a background check. They had me give them references, and they were very serious about checking out my character, which I applauded. I don't think if you do that due diligence that a prospective board member is going to feel pushed away unless they have reason to feel pushed away, because what you might discover, rather you're sending the message that we're really serious about who we bring on our board. So I think character is the next big thing.
yeah. I wanted to address two things because I think it can be misunderstood, not misunderstood. People may not understand the idea of culture, right, of an organization. So, how would you define culture when it comes to, when you want to define the culture of your organization? How would you go about doing that?
Yeah, I think I describe it as the unspoken assumptions about how people should think, feel, and act, and the behaviors that result from those assumptions. Right. So oftentimes we don't even know because we haven't thought about it. And so that's where core values, research shows that what are your core values? Maybe it's trustworthiness. Maybe it's authenticity. There are a range of things that define your board culture, how you treat one another. And there's also this effect of what I call cognitive dissonance. They might agree to something, but then you see they act in conflict to what they've already agreed upon. And I worked with a national board once, who had this problem. And once we brought it to their attention, I did it through interviewing a number of board members, and some of them felt dismissed, some of them felt yelled at, others felt that they were being bullied. And when I put that up on the screen at the first board meeting, they all sat back and thought, we get the message. We understand now that the way we're behaving is in conflict with what we believe are the values we should carry into the boardroom.
Could
So
you,
two
sorry, go
pieces.
ahead. Finish your thought. I apologize.
That's it.
So like, give me an example of a nonprofit that you worked for or worked with where they had really done a nice job of defining their culture. And you don't have to say you say the name of the nonprofit, but but I'm curious to hear what the culture, the defined culture was. Um,
Yeah, that's that very same board that I talked about. They they thought more about this once where they saw where the conflict was, and what they came up with was dignity was one of their core values. Listening was a core value. Respect was another value, and they started to act on those once they made them explicit. And we're not talking about organizational core values, which is a different conversation than this. We're talking about the core values of the board, how the board interacts, the values they carry, and make actionable.
Yeah. And then at the same time, I know it's always a great idea to have your mission statement as well, so that
Right.
they all work together. You know what your mission
Absolutely.
is, and then those cultural values. And um, I know, like, one of the companies I had built. It was my second company where, and it relates to nonprofits, so it's worth talking about. Where before I opened the doors of the company, I said, "This is the culture I want." And I said, this is the type of people I want. I want to hire people who fit into this culture. And it worked great. I've always done it that way, where I've read so much about how culture is important, your mission's important, and so I said, you know what, I'm not going to wait to define my culture and mission. I'm going to do it ahead of time, and it worked out well. So I know some of the executive directors that are listening now. It'd say is, it's not like I can get a pool of 20 people to pull from who are breaking down the door to get on my board.
That's right.
I kind of have to take what I can get.
Um,
How would you address those concerns?
First of all, having been served as an executive director for a number of years, I completely understand that the last thing you want to do is fix your board because you've got so many operational things to handle day to day. And why isn't the board chair doing his or her job, right? So, but there's a reality piece of this as well, and that is that you have to pay attention to your board. You have to figure out how you will find the right people. What I recommend is creating a recruitment profile, and I call that looking at competencies. Because the thing, and there's a lot of research that I quote in the book about how hard it has been to create diverse, inclusive, equitable boards. Right? It's people complain about it, but no one is really paying attention to recruitment as a strategic practice. You wouldn't grab the CEO off the street just because they were within 20 feet, right? You'd go do a search. And I recommend that boards have a search committee that's constantly functioning throughout the year to identify what characteristics do we need. And I say, what's the character look like? What do their competencies look like? What connections do you need? Draw up that profile, because it's not just business acumen you're looking for, right? Just because someone is credentialed doesn't mean they're competent. You're looking for a specific set of competencies, and you need to interview for it, and you need to look for it. And I've also found that once you define what you're looking for, and when I was chair of a board, I found this to be true. Once you know what you're looking for, it's a lot easier to find it. You just need to do the work to know what you're looking for.
Yeah. Yeah, I can kind of see where, even if you have a smaller board, you can tell one person on that board, or get them to gain agreement on the idea that, hey, you're the one who's in charge of making sure we have a pipeline of other potential board members.
Yeah, yeah, and it's a practice. It's not complicated, but I always recommend you just step back at a few board meetings. Say, what are the competencies? What are the governance competencies you're looking for? What are the character competencies? Are you looking for strategic thinkers? Are you looking for creative people? Are you looking for those who have demonstrated sound judgment? And so, what do you need on your board at this time? Part of it might be subject matter knowledge, right? So there might be a whole range. And once you write that maybe pseudo job description, but I call it the profile up, you can look for those people. You can tell people what you're looking for. Because, I do a lot of searches for my clients, and once we know what we're looking for, it's much easier to find it, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
very clear and specific about it. And I believe you can do that.
Now, what about uh, executive directors and presidents of the board who really look at giving board positions to the biggest donors as a way to leverage that position to get more money? What's your thoughts on that?
Mistake?
Mm.
Yeah. Unless they're competent to serve. And that's the point. Although you need to raise money, absolutely. Um, Governance is responsible for financial stability, right, over the long term. But your best fundraisers might not be your best governance board members. And you need to search for governance competence, right, to get the right people who know how to manage a board for the board chair, rather than someone who might be the most influential or most wealthy. So it's yeah, that's getting in the cart before the horse.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah. So what else? I mean, what are the other things that you, when it comes to onboarding and recruiting, that you really address in your book?
well, beyond the character, I talked a little bit about competencies, and then there's connections. Now, first thing most executive directors think is connections to people who are affluent, right? And that's definitely one set of connections you need. But you also need connections to the community you serve. You also need connections to those who are influential and are influential within the community and can influence opinion. And another type are those that might really know how to help you position your nonprofit because of their special knowledge or special understandings of how things work. So it's a matter of really building out that portfolio of what types of connections you need. And beyond the connections, I move into composition. And in composition, I talk about inclusion, equity, and diversity, because those are important things we've overlooked. They're hard to do. And I interviewed a few Black Americans who talked to me about some of the challenges that they have that really influenced how I was able to fill out that chapter. Because we all come to situations where we bring social categorization or implicit bias, or more two of the more favorite words. People get enculturated into a majority style of acting. So it's hard to create a diverse, inclusive, and equitable culture unless you pay attention to it and make it an explicit part of your recruitment plan.
Yeah, yeah,
And that diversity really adds value, and there's a lot of research that supports that as well.
yeah.
And
What about onboarding? What are some suggestions? One of the things I certainly can think of is, you know, if you really gonna if you have a really good president of the board, I would think that he or she has built the systems of the board so that if they're not there, if someone else took over the position, that there wouldn't be any hiccups. So in other words, is having really defined processes. Now I would think that a lot of people who are on the board and who are presidents of the board are people who have been pretty successful in either the business world or the nonprofit world, and would intuitively know that that's important. But am I wrong in saying that? Am I wrong in saying that someone who comes on and is president of the board would intuitively know that we have to set up systems so that when they're no longer doing that, it still runs really smoothly?
Yeah. Well, it depends on the nonprofit. It's so
Uh,
idiosyncratic. I've seen some great board chairs who do exactly as you've described. Right?
mm,
I watch them come in and manage the board, set up policies to govern, right, and know how to keep the line clear between governance and management. But not everyone knows what governance is, right? It's oversight, but it's not operations. And so many times I'll see business people come in and they know operations, so they start meddling in operations rather than in oversight. Because governance, there's a book out a few years ago by a few Harvard faculty called Governance as Leadership, and talking about that the first role is oversight, but that's just the beginning. The second is strategy for the organization, and the third is innovation. So knowing how to think about the future is a really important responsibility of the board, and how to be aware of the organization and how it functions. And I call that continuity. And that's what I focus on when I talk about onboarding. Do board members really understand how the organization works, right? Do they understand, and do they understand their role in governance in relationship to how the organization works? So understanding that continuity of how it all works together is really important for them to make these sorts of strategic and innovative suggestions about how the organization might serve more people, fit better within the community, do better work, those
Yeah.
sorts of things.
Yeah. What other parts of your book do you think have been really, really important to the readers that you've gotten feedback on, and they said, this really helped me out?
Yeah, it's been interesting. It's been all over the board. In fact, someone just told me last night. I was meeting with the board, and I didn't know she'd purchased my book, but she said when I got into, I thought I was going to be able to read it pretty quickly. She said, but you got into some really deep stuff when you talk about board composition that we really, really need to think about. So that area where I do dig into, the social justice issues, gender identity issues, and how a majority culture, there tends to be a white majority, primarily male culture from the majority of boards in the United States, and those that are primarily white tend not to have too much diversity. And then you'll have organizations that have primarily Black leaders, but you also have the disability area where you do have people with disabilities leading organizations, but it all tends to be siloed. There's not a real sense of integration within the organization, within any board, in terms of different perspectives when we talk about diversity. So that's one of the areas that I've heard most about.
So, in the beginning, a lot of our listeners are smaller nonprofits, right? They're under $5 million in revenue. And, they might have had some good experiences with their board. They might have had some bad experiences with their board. Who's kind of calling the shots when you have, the executive director in a younger nonprofit brings on the president of the board? Who's kind of calling the shots? Is it the executive director or is it the president of the board?
Well, I've seen both. I've seen where the board is primarily self-managing itself, even in the smaller nonprofits. And I've seen it the other way as well. The thing is to know your role. And the executive director sometimes is drawn into needing to explain to the board member what governance is, right? It's about this oversight, strategy, innovation, that you're helping us serve our constituency better. And management is getting in the trenches and doing the work. And I often say the board is what, the management is how. And there's where I find the rub. Oftentimes I do find that executive directors need to help board members understand what governance is and where the line between governance and management resides. Because governance is in places to protect the public interest, right? Since it's not profit.
Now, I'm assuming, of course, that you've come on board as a consultant for training for the boards in many cases. Is that accurate?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what you do, right? So when you, what are the things when you come in? So let me ask you this. What percentage of the time are you coming onto a board because it's dysfunctional?
90.
Okay.
I often joke
well, that's not 99. So
thank God for dysfunctional boards because I have a business. So,
I got you.
Yeah.
So 90% is dysfunctional. Who's calling you? Is it the executive director, president of the board?
It's pretty well split between the two. Yeah.
50-50. All right.
I've had board members call me that saying we need somebody because I know and a few of us know things aren't working well at
Yeah.
this organization. Then I'll have executive directors a lot of times in a panic saying, I can't manage my board. They're overstepping their bounds.
Yeah.
They aren't really providing good oversight. How can you help me?
Yeah.
And so when I go into those situations, I always start with not just board values, right? So what's your covenant in terms of your culture, those values, but looking at core values.
Yeah.
I start with
So,
what calls this organization into existence. And I describe it as people who founded the organization said what is shouldn't be. And the values that they held called them to do something about it. So I said, what's at your heart? What underlies everything? Those values that call you to do the work you're doing, those are your core values. You may have lots of values, 20, 30, 40 different values, but what are those 3 or 4 core values that called you to do your work? Starting there with a board, it really is a grounding place. It gets them centered in thinking about why they exist, why the organization exists. And then I go to vision and then to mission. So those are usually the 3 I start with in talking about getting a board settled. And then I'll go in to talk more about what is the role of governance. And there's a lot of stuff written on what's the role of governance in the nonprofit sector.
so is it safe to say that 90% or higher of the situations you go into to help where they haven't defined the culture, they haven't defined the mission?
I would say that mission often, yes. Culture, most of the time, they don't say what,
Yeah.
right? We just work this way. Well, then we should look at how
Yeah.
you're
Yeah.
functioning. So culture is often unconscious, and core values um, are somewhat frequent, but I wouldn't say the majority of organizations have a sense of what their core values, in the true sense of this is what calls us to do our work. Core values, right? The
So
deep down
yeah.
stuff.
So it begs. It's obvious to me that if you want to, that a much better functioning board is a board where everyone has already worked on the project of understanding mission, culture, and core values. If
Yeah.
a lot of problems will
Mhm.
take care of themselves, for example, the people you bring into the board,
Mhm.
if you've identified those 3 key things, which I'm not saying is easy for someone to gather all of the what's the right word? I'm trying to think. Not mice, something that's running around like crazy. Whatever. But if you, because it's hard, trying to get everybody on the same page.
Herding cats.
Yeah, herding cats. I just couldn't think of it, right?
That's right.
And especially because I have a dog.
I've been
But
there.
yeah, but especially because it's not like it's a corporation or a company where there's one person in charge and that's it. It's either the owner or the CEO, and that's all there is to it, right? In a case with a nonprofit, it's a little less. The line is a little less obvious, I
Mhm.
guess.
Yeah. Yeah. And mainly because of lack of understanding where that line is, right? And board and executive directors are often afraid to draw that line because what I tell executive directors is you're not subordinate to the board chair or even subordinate to the board. They hold you accountable and can hire and fire you, but you're the executive director. They're the directors, you're a director, but the executive director responsible for management, and
Yeah,
that's your job. So they should test you, challenge you, ask you great questions, but stay out of management, but then hold you accountable to the outcomes, right?
yeah, yeah,
They can always fire you. And you also, the other problem, oftentimes a board chair will try to manage the CEO. And the CEO is not responsible to the board chair. The CEO is responsible to the corporate entity, the board.
yeah, yeah.
Um, and that's important as well.
So, we've you come on, I'm sure within 15 minutes you've already figured out the mission, the culture, and the core values. I'm kidding, of course. That's a lot of work. After that, what is the next thing you typically on a consulting assignment will get into with them?
Well, then they begin to think about what is their value proposition, right? Their brand position and value proposition. For the last 2 decades at least, the nonprofit sector has been growing at 5%. Philanthropy has been growing at 2.5%. That's easy math to figure out, right? So if you're going to be competitive or collaborative in the sector, you need to know your value proposition
Yeah.
and how you fit together. The other piece of that is definitions. So when I talk about, because you mentioned core values, culture, and mission, but vision is also very important. But vision is not an exercise of looking in the mirror to see how great you are. Vision is not doing that. Vision is looking out the window and saying, how will the world be different for those we serve when we succeed?
No, I like it.
Right. So focusing on that type of vision that's pragmatic and has some real feet to it is important as well.
I love I love it when it's something's clean and structured. It just makes things so much easier.
Yeah, and the boards do have profound experiences when we just look at these simple things, right?
Yeah,
Because to me, clarity is the root of all goodness, right? Clarity of expectation, clarity of definition, clarity of understanding. So so with mission, I say it's simply what you do for whom to what effect,
yeah,
right? All those three elements should be in there, and many times one of those is left out. But what's the effect of what you're going to be? Do you really know who you serve? And we go through a process of defining who you serve. You have to have the capability to serve them, right?
yeah,
So you
yeah,
actually have to be able to serve them and change their lives. That's who you serve. How are you going to change their lives, right? And what are
yeah,
you going to do to do it?
yeah.
So that, again, another simple definition is very impactful when talking to boards.
So, our podcast today is about, onboarding and recruiting of board members. We've talked about here doing lots of, legwork and groundwork. I'm thinking of the word groundwork to kind of, you know, set the framework for the person, for the people that we want to recruit, right? We talked about we having someone, or identifying a committee or a person who is responsible for having a pipeline of bringing additional board members on, if not now, then in the future. And we've also talked about the idea of making sure that that person, through background checks or good interviews, matches the values of that we've defined earlier on. What other things? Let's go one step further. What recommendations would you have for onboarding people so that people who do join the board? What are some ideas that you would have about best practices in that regards?
All right. I'll give you an example from my experience when I chaired a board. It was a foundation for a school. My daughter happened to be at the school, and so obviously I was very interested in what that foundation was able to do. And so when I was asked to chair it, I was very hesitant to do so because I saw what needed to be done. So we went through this process of really identifying the core values and the vision and the mission. But then we looked at board composition and board expectations. And the first thing that I did was get on the phone to talk to a few people who weren't showing up. Board chairs are really hesitant to do this, but it's a real critical responsibility. So I said, we haven't seen you at the board meetings recently. Is there a reason why you're not able to participate? And because we really need people to show up. I don't know if this is the right time in your life to really invest your energy in this. It may not be right. But I just ask you to think about it, because if every board member were expecting to show up and be fully participating in the board, well, he politely resigned, but that's a hard conversation to have. But that's the first thing to do. But then the other piece about finding people is really defining character, competence is you need in connections, and culture, right? As you said. And the work really is to what do you need from people in each of those areas. And I split it into two categories: what you must have and what you need some people to have, right? But as you have that in front of you, work that on a regular basis. Not only should one board member be responsible for recruitment or onboarding and looking at what needs to be done, but I think a committee, a group of people, and also the board should be brought back to the board on a regular basis. How do we renew ourselves? How do we keep ourselves really functioning at our highest level? What educational needs do we have to help us understand our role better or understand the organization better, et cetera?
Well, it's all good stuff. So it just makes sense to me that you just start over, start from ground zero, right? You start over, you start pecking away at it. The only other thing I think I would, it's something that I think that to be honest with you, I did well with, and that is, um, what the recommendation I would have, because I'm on a nonprofit board and too, and I don't like dictating to people what they should or shouldn't do. I want to get their buy-in, so they need to be involved
Right.
in the discussion of, what's our mission, what's our values. You can't just, as an executive director or president of the board, saying, this is our values and
Right.
that's it, right?
Right.
And
Right. Absolutely.
the reason for that is you just don't get you're not going to get
That's
buy-in.
right.
And also the
Absolutely right.
answers,
Right.
I don't like doing it because I usually get better insights from other people that I wouldn't have thought of, you
Right.
know. So bring everybody along. I think this is hard work. I mean, I think I just think bringing someone like yourself in um, is really, don't be penny smart and dime foolish, right? Uh, 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 you know, spend the money, because probably in the long run, it's going to make a huge difference to your survival of your nonprofit. Would you agree with that?
Yeah. I mean, so many boards just kind of fumble along, right? And they do, when they're not really well trained, they do dumb things.
Yeah.
Right? And they aren't looking at the best interests of the organization itself. They're looking at, well, how much are we enjoying this work that we're doing? How proud of the work are we that we're doing? But are they really focused on how can we make this the best nonprofit in the community? Are they thinking like that? And it's a matter of changing the mindset and get people really engaged in the best interest of the community you serve, even more than the nonprofit itself.
Yeah, even going to, like, when you're talking about board attendance, you showed me a board meeting that's running really well. I'll show you 100%
You're
attendance,
absolutely right.
right? It's if you have poor attendance, it's because people are bored,
That's right. That's right.
right?
And having fun. I always
Yeah,
talk about board meetings should be fun. They should be
yeah,
enjoyable. Not and serious. You're dealing with serious business,
yeah,
but they should be fun.
yeah.
And board members need a chance to socialize. Not another gala, not another event, but socialize with one another also helps. If there's just a few minutes before or after a board meeting when people just chat with one another, it strengthens board as well.
Well, good stuff. Well, that's all the time we have for today, and I would like to very much thank James Mueller from James Mueller and Associates LLC for coming on today's podcast. If you like today's podcast, please feel free to share it with a friend and also subscribe on your favorite podcasting app. If you like today's podcast, please give us a review on your podcasting app to help us get the word out. And of course, if you're looking for a line of credit for your nonprofit, you can call us at 862-207-4118 or visit our website at nonprofitmbapodcast.com. James, if people want to get in touch with you, how would they go about doing that?
The easiest place is my website. My first letter of my first name, J Mueller at jmuellerassociates.com.
And that's JMUELLER associates.com.
Right.
It also will be in the notes from our podcast as well. And James, if people want to order your book, how would they go about doing that?
It's on all the e-reader libraries. It's on Amazon. It's at Barnes and Noble. It's pretty accessible. Just Onboarding Champions, the 7 recruiting principles of highly effective nonprofit boards.
Great, great. All right. Well, listen, James, thanks for coming on.
My pleasure.
I want to thank everyone out there for all the work that you do. I often say this at the end of every show. We need everybody to really do their part in making the world a better place. We're all connected. And hopefully these podcasts help you run a better organization. Certainly helps me learn more about our clients and also helps me run my own board better as well. So everybody have a great day. Please stay safe and please enjoy the summer. Thank God the weather's getting nicer. Today it's 81 degrees out in New Jersey, and I'm much happier than I was about 6 months ago. So everybody, I hope you have a fantastic day.